He bought her diamonds. He bought her a penthouse. He flew her to Paris on a private jet while his pregnant wife sat alone in an empty house, eating dinner by herself, sleeping in a bed that still smelled like a man who never came home. Everyone saw it. Everyone talked about it. And Damien Vescari never once denied a single word. But here's the truth no one knew. The thing that changes everything. The reason behind every gift, every public humiliation, every cruel silence. If you think you know this story, you don't. Stay until the end. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The estate sat on 11 acres of land outside the city, surrounded by iron gates and old oak trees that blocked the view from the road. It was the kind of place that looked beautiful in photographs. Pale stone walls, arched windows, a private garden that a team of landscapers maintained every Thursday, whether anyone walked in it or not. From the outside, it looked like a home. From the inside, Vivian Cross had learned, it was something closer to a waiting room, a place where you sat and waited for a life that kept not arriving. She was 7 months pregnant. The kitchen light hummed above her at 8:30 in the evening as she stood at the counter, eating leftover soup directly from the pot because she hadn't seen the point in dirtying a bowl. Her back ached in that specific, relentless way it had been aching for 3 weeks. Low and constant, like someone pressing a thumb into the base of her spine and never letting up. The baby moved, a slow roll beneath her ribs, less like a kick and more like a turning, as if the child inside her was trying to find a more comfortable position and failing. Vivian pressed her palm flat against her belly and said nothing. The house was quiet. It was always quiet. She had been alone for 11 days. Not alone in the way people say when they mean they had a quiet evening. Alone in the real sense. No car in the driveway. No voice on the other end of the phone. No text messages that amounted to anything beyond logistics. The last time Damien had been in this house, he had stood in the doorway of the bedroom for approximately 40 seconds, told her the security team would check in twice a day, and left without kissing her. He had not looked her in the eye. He had not asked how the baby was. He had not explained where he was going or when he planned to return, and when she had tried to ask, he had looked at her with an expression so flat and so distant that the question had died somewhere between her throat and the open air. That was 11 days ago. She finished the soup. She rinsed the pot. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark garden and thought, not for the first time, that she needed to stop waiting for things to make sense. Vivian Cross had not been a naive woman when she married Damien Vescari. She had known who he was, or she had known the version of who he was that a man like that allows you to know, which is not the same thing at all. She had known about the business interests that weren't exactly businesses, the associates who weren't exactly associates, the phone calls he stepped out of rooms to take, the conversations that stopped when she walked in, the money that moved in ways she had learned not to ask about. She had known all of that, and she had chosen him anyway, because she had also known the other version, the one who sat with her until 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, who remembered the name of every person she had ever mentioned even once, who had a particular way of laughing at something genuinely funny that made him look for just a moment like a completely different man. She had chosen both versions. She had thought that was called love. Now she wasn't sure what it was called. She lowered herself carefully into the chair by the window. Everything was careful now. Everything involved calculation, because her body had become a thing she had to negotiate with rather than simply inhabit. And she opened her laptop. She told herself she wasn't going to look. She told herself this every night, and every night she looked anyway, because there was something in her that needed to confirm the wound was still there, the way you press a bruise to make sure it still hurts. Sabrina Hale's social media page loaded in 4 seconds. The most recent post was from 6 hours ago, a photograph taken in Monaco, soft evening light, the kind that costs nothing and makes everything look like it was designed. Sabrina was wearing a dress that Vivian recognized, not because she had seen it before, but because she had seen the receipt, Damien's account, $47,000. The caption said something in French that translated roughly to "some nights are worth remembering," and there were 462 comments beneath it, most of them in the category of people saying exactly what Sabrina wanted them to say. Vivian closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet house with her hand on her stomach, and she did not cry, because she had spent the first 2 months of this situation crying, and it had solved nothing and changed nothing, and left her feeling worse than the original wound. She had moved past crying. She was somewhere past it now, in a country without a name, where what she mostly felt was the steady low burn of a woman who has been patient far longer than patience deserved. She picked up her phone. She had not called Damien in 9 days. She stared at his contact name, just D, because at some point she had deleted the full name and never put it back, for reasons she hadn't examined too closely. And she put the phone face down on the table and didn't call. What she did instead was make a list. She had been making lists for 2 weeks, quietly, in the back pages of a notebook she kept in the drawer of her bedside table. Not shopping lists, not to-do lists. A different kind of list entirely, the kind a woman makes when she has started to accept that the life she planned is not the life she is going to get, and she needs to start building something else from whatever materials are currently available. She wrote down what money was in her own accounts, separate from anything connected to Damien. She wrote down the name of the attorney a friend had recommended 6 months ago, a woman she had never called because calling would have meant admitting she was considering what calling implied. She wrote down the name of the clinic where her obstetrician worked, and the address, and the direct line to the nurse who had been kind to her at the last appointment. She wrote down the things she needed. Not the things she wanted. She had given up on that column. Just the things she needed to get through what was coming, with or without a husband. The baby moved again, stronger this time, an elbow or a knee pressing insistently against the wall of her. "I know," Vivian said aloud, to the empty kitchen, to the quiet house, to the child who wasn't born yet, and already seemed to understand that things were not right. "I know, we're going to be okay." She didn't know if she believed that, but she said it because someone needed to. 340 miles away, in a hotel suite on the 42nd floor of a building in the financial district of a city she had never visited, Sabrina Hale was on her 4th glass of champagne and her 2nd phone call of the evening, and she was not thinking about Vivian Cross at all. Sabrina Hale did not think about Vivian Cross. This was deliberate. Vivian Cross was a subject that Sabrina had categorized and filed under irrelevant, alongside other things that technically existed but were not worth attention. She was Damien's wife in the legal sense. Paperwork, signatures, a ceremony that had apparently happened 4 years ago at something small and private, which was exactly the kind of ceremony Sabrina would have predicted for a woman like that. Quiet, unimpressive, forgettable. Damien had made his preferences clear as far as Sabrina was concerned, and his preferences were expressed in $47,000 dresses and Monaco sunsets, and the way he looked at her across restaurant tables in a manner that made everyone in the room understand exactly what was happening between them, or so she believed. "The transfer cleared," said the voice on the phone. Not Damien's voice. A different voice, older, careful, accented with the particular flatness of a man who had spent too long in the company of other men who never raised their voices. "All 3 accounts." "Good," Sabrina said. She moved to the window with her glass. The city was a grid of light below her, orderly and indifferent. "And the documentation?" "Being prepared. Harlan wants the full package by the end of the month. Harlan will get it when it's ready." She sipped. "Tell him that." "Sabrina," the voice dropped slightly. "Harlan isn't someone who responds well to being told to wait. Harlan isn't someone who responds well to a lot of things. That's his problem." She watched a plane cross the sky above the buildings, blinking red and white. "The documentation will be ready when it's ready. What I need from you right now is confirmation that the secondary accounts are clean." A pause. "They're clean. Then we're fine." She ended the call and stood there a moment longer, looking at the city, turning the glass slowly in her hand. She was 41 years old, and she had built this operation from a single boutique investment firm into something that moved money across 6 countries without leaving a trail that any regulatory body had managed to follow for more than 8 months. She was careful. She was methodical. She trusted no one with more than they needed to know, and she never under any circumstances moved faster than the timeline required. Damien Viscari was a complication she had not anticipated but had quickly found a use for. He was exactly the kind of man she needed in certain rooms, the kind with a name that made other men step back, with an infrastructure that moved quietly, with a reputation for being someone you did not cross without consequence. She had cultivated his attention with the same deliberate patience she applied to everything else. The dinners, the trips, the careful curation of public appearances designed to look effortless. She had given him exactly what a man like that expected to receive. And in return, he had given her access to rooms and conversations that would have otherwise taken her years longer to reach. She had not expected to enjoy his company. That had been an unexpected variable, and she had chosen not to examine it too closely. Her phone lit up on the table. A message, not a name she recognized. A number she kept in a separate system, the kind that routed through 3 different servers before it arrived. Package is moving. Confirm receipt. Sabrina typed back a single word and put the phone away. Somewhere in the city below her, in an unmarked car parked outside a building she had never visited, a man whose name she had never been told was receiving that confirmation and relaying it to someone else. And the chain continued, link by link, the way it always did. Clean, orderly, invisible. She poured the rest of the champagne and didn't think about Vivian Cross. But Damien Vescari was not in Monaco. He was in a basement. Not a dramatic basement. Not the kind with a single hanging bulb and chains on the walls. A functional basement in a building that belonged, on paper, to a logistics company that nobody would look at twice. Concrete floor, a folding table, 4 chairs, and 3 monitors arranged in an L shape, displaying feeds from 14 different cameras across 6 different locations. 2 of his men stood near the door. A woman named Reyes, who worked for a federal task force and was the only law enforcement officer Damien Vescari had agreed to cooperate with in 11 years, sat across the table from him, looking at a spreadsheet that had taken 8 months to assemble. The third shell company, Reyes said, tapping the screen, registered in the Caymans, controlled through a nominee director, but the signatory authority traces back here. She drew a line with her finger. That's Sabrina's legal entity in Delaware. I know, Damien said. The transfer 3 weeks ago moved 14 million. We can trace 9 million of it. The other 5 went somewhere our analysts haven't located yet. It went to Harlan's accounts, Damien said. I don't have the specific routing yet. I'm working on it. Reyes looked at him. She had the flat, measured expression of someone who had dealt with too many men who claimed to be working on things. When? When I have it. He looked at the monitor. One of the cameras showed the exterior of a building in the financial district. The hotel where Sabrina was currently staying, the 42nd floor. He had received the report of her phone call 20 minutes ago. He had been waiting for that transfer confirmation. She's moving money faster than we anticipated, which means either she's spooked or she's accelerating for a different reason. Which do you think it is? He was quiet for a moment. On the monitor, the hotel building sat still and lit, indifferent to everything being discussed about it. She's not spooked, he said finally. She's ahead of schedule. She thinks everything is going exactly the way she planned. Reyes made a note. That works in our favor. Yes, but we need the Harlan connection documented before we move. Without it, the syndicate just reconstitutes under a different structure. You understand that? I understand that. We're talking weeks, Damien, maybe 10 days if the forensic accountants move fast. She looked at him directly. Can you hold the position for 10 more days? Damien Vescari looked at the spreadsheet on the screen. He thought about 11 acres of land outside the city, pale stone walls, a woman 7 months pregnant eating dinner alone. He thought about the last time he had stood in that doorway and been unable to explain a single thing that was true, because every true thing was a wire in a circuit that could not afford to be touched. He thought about the photograph from Monaco that had been taken by a photographer he had quietly arranged to be in that location at that time, because a photograph of Sabrina in Monaco with the right caption in the right publication kept her comfortable, and comfortable was the condition required for her to keep moving money through channels he was watching in real time. He had done that. He had set that up. He had looked at the notification when it was published, and he had thought about what Vivian would see if she looked, and he had put the phone in his pocket and gone back to work. 10 days, he said. Fine, Reyes nodded. She closed the spreadsheet. There's one more thing. She didn't look comfortable with whatever the next sentence was, which was notable because Reyes was not a person who looked uncomfortable. Our intelligence unit flagged a concern 2 days ago. We think someone in Harlan's operation may have started looking at your personal connections. The air in the room changed by approximately nothing. Damien's expression did not move. What kind of looking? Preliminary? Surveillance level? Nothing active yet? She met his eyes. But your wife? I know. His voice was completely even. I've been monitoring it. Damien, I said I know. He stood up. Is there anything else on the financials tonight? Reyes held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her notes. Not tonight. Then we're done for now. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. One of the men by the door moved to open it. Damien paused at the threshold and looked back at the monitors, at the 14 cameras, at the still image of the hotel building in the financial district. 10 days. He needed 10 days, and then this was done. He left the basement and walked up the stairs into the cold air and got into the car that was waiting, and he told the driver to take him somewhere else entirely because there was nowhere he wanted to go and nowhere was better than the alternatives. Vivian's appointment with her obstetrician was at 9 in the morning on a Thursday. The clinic was 40 minutes from the estate, and she drove herself, which she knew the security team noted and didn't like, but she had told them clearly that she was not going to need a driver to take her to a medical appointment, and she had not asked for their opinion on the matter. The waiting room had 3 other women in it, all further along than she was or had been recently. A toddler belonging to one of them ran in small, determined circles near the magazine rack. Nobody looked at Vivian, and she was grateful. Dr. Fenwick was a compact woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses she wore pushed up into her hair more often than actually on her face, and she had been Vivian's doctor for 2 years. She was not the kind of doctor who made small talk when small talk wasn't useful. Blood pressure's slightly elevated from last month, she said, reviewing the numbers. Not alarming, but I want you tracking it at home. Daily. Same time each day. Okay. You're sleeping? Mostly. Dr. Fenwick looked at her over the glasses she had just pushed down. Mostly. 5 to 6 hours. Some nights more. Stress levels. Vivian looked at the wall behind the doctor's head. It had a framed print on it, abstract, blue and green shapes, the kind of thing chosen specifically because it communicated nothing. Manageable, she said. The doctor's expression indicated she had heard the word manageable used in this exact tone by this exact category of patient before. She didn't push it. I want to see you in 2 weeks. If the blood pressure spikes before then, you call me directly, not the general line. I will. And I want you to consider, Fenwick said, in a voice that was careful without being gentle in a way that felt patronizing, whether the current living situation is the best possible environment for the final trimester. Stress has measurable physical effects. Isolation compounds them. Vivian was quiet. I'm not asking you to tell me anything, the doctor said. That's not my business. I'm asking you to think about it. I'm thinking about it, Vivian said, which was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in weeks. She drove home with the window cracked and the radio off, and she thought about it the whole way. Oh, the problem was this. She still loved him. She had tried very hard in the weeks since this had become what it was, to stop. She had cataloged his failures, the absence, the silence, the photographs, the 11 days, the 40 seconds in the doorway, the look on his face that wasn't coldness exactly, but was something worse than coldness, something deliberate. She had cataloged them carefully, and she had tried to make them into something that would stop the love, turn it into something else, anger or contempt or simple indifference. And she had not succeeded. This was not weakness. She had known enough of her own life to understand that love is not obedient. It doesn't go when you tell it to. It sits there in the room with you while you're trying to reason it out, while you're reading articles about self-preservation and calling attorneys whose names you got from friends and making lists in the back of notebooks. It sits there in the room and it waits, and it is patient in a way that has nothing to do with wisdom. She still loved him. She also knew, with the same clarity she had about the blood pressure and the lists and the name of the attorney, that love was not going to be enough if the rest of the structure wasn't there. Love without honesty. Love without presence. Love as a feeling that showed up on one side of the equation while nothing showed up on the other. It wasn't a foundation. It was a feeling, and feelings were not load-bearing. She had to protect the baby. That was the sentence underneath every other sentence. She had to protect this child, who was real and coming regardless of what else happened, who was already a person in some essential way that she could feel every time she pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the response. That was the thing that couldn't wait for the rest of it to resolve. She stopped at the gate of the estate and entered the code and waited for it to open, and she thought, 2 more months. The baby comes in 2 months. Between now and then, she would keep making the lists, keep tracking the blood pressure, keep speaking to her lawyer, keep moving forward through the specific kind of loneliness that is worse than ordinary loneliness because it exists inside a marriage, inside a house, inside what is supposed to be a life. She pulled through the gate. The garden was green and manicured and empty. The pale stone of the house caught the morning light. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Not Damien. A number she didn't recognize. Not a number she'd seen before. Not a saved contact. Just 11 digits that meant nothing to her. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "Mrs. Vescari," said a woman's voice. It was smooth and measured and entirely without warmth. The voice of someone who has practiced delivering things. "You don't know me, but I've been wanting to speak with you for some time." Vivian's hand tightened on the wheel. "My name," said the voice, "is Sabrina Hale, and I think it's past time you heard the truth about your husband." The gate closed behind her with a heavy mechanical sound, and Vivian sat in the driveway of the estate with the engine idling and the phone pressed to her ear. And whatever she had been preparing herself for, whatever version of the next thing she had been building toward in the back pages of that notebook, this was not it. "I'm listening," she said, and the line went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Vivian had the particular sensation of standing at the edge of something that, once you've crossed it, cannot be uncrossed. "Good," said Sabrina Hale. "Then let me start from the beginning." Sabrina Hale's voice had a quality that Vivian immediately recognized and immediately distrusted, the quality of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say enough times that it no longer sounded rehearsed. Smooth at the edges, controlled in the middle, the kind of voice that knew exactly where it was going. "Your husband," Sabrina said, "has been using me." Vivian said nothing. The engine was still running. The driveway was still empty. The garden sat in its perfect Thursday morning stillness, and none of it meant anything. "I don't mean the way you think," Sabrina continued. "I mean in a specific and deliberate way, for a specific purpose, that he has not explained to you or to me. I've spent the last 3 months trying to understand what that purpose is. I believe I now do." "Why are you calling me?" Vivian said. It wasn't really a question. It was a sentence that meant, "Get to it." A brief pause. "Because I think you deserve to know the truth, and because I think knowing it will help both of us." That's a very generous explanation. It's the accurate one. Vivian put the car in park. She was not going inside yet. She was going to sit here in this driveway and listen to this woman's voice and try to determine how much of what she was hearing was real and how much of it was a different kind of manipulation wearing the costume of honesty. She was good at this. She had gotten very good at it over the past 4 years. "Talk," she said. Sabrina talked. What she said, in the next 14 minutes, was this: that she had met Damien Vescari 8 months ago at a private event connected to a series of investment introductions that had been arranged through a mutual contact she had since realized she did not actually know as well as she had believed. That the relationship, if it could be called that, had developed quickly and publicly, and with what felt at the time like mutual interest. That Damien had been generous, attentive, visible in all the ways a man could be visible, and that she had accepted this without examining it carefully because it had suited her interest to do so. That in the last 6 weeks, she had begun to notice small things, inconsistencies, the way certain conversations seemed to happen near particular locations, the way certain information she shared casually seemed to move in directions she couldn't account for, the way Damien asked specific questions that felt like small talk, but built, over time, into a map of something she was only now beginning to read. "He's been building a case," Sabrina said. "I don't know exactly against whom, but I know the structure. I've seen enough operations to recognize when someone is using proximity as a collection method." Vivian's jaw was tight. "You're telling me you think he's been investigating you?" I'm telling you, I think he's been investigating people connected to me. I'm a conduit. I move money. I facilitate connections between parties who need to remain at a certain distance from each other. She paused. I'm not going to pretend to you that I'm in a clean business, Mrs. Vescari, but I also know the difference between the people I work with and the people I work for, and the people at the top of this structure are not individuals who respond well to scrutiny. And you think Damien has been bringing scrutiny. I think Damien has been building a fire under something very large, and I think neither of us was told the temperature. Vivian sat with that for a moment. Outside, a bird landed on the garden wall and left. The gate at the end of the driveway stood closed. Why, she said carefully, are you telling me this instead of telling him you've figured it out? The pause this time was longer. Because I made some calls this morning, about you specifically, and what I found. Another pause. Calculated or genuine, Vivian couldn't determine. There are people in this situation who are not going to be satisfied with whatever Damien is building. They're going to look for leverage. And the most obvious piece of leverage a man like your husband has is not a bank account or a business connection. She let that sit. I'm calling you because I think you may need to be somewhere else before this gets to where I believe it's going. The line went quiet. Vivian's hand was pressed flat against her stomach without her having decided to put it there. I'll think about what you've said, she told Sabrina Hale, and ended the call. She sat in the car for 6 more minutes, not moving, her hand on her stomach, watching the gate. Then she went inside and called the attorney. But the attorney's name was Clara Voss, and she had an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a waiting room that felt like it had been specifically designed to signal that whatever you were about to discuss was serious but survivable. Gray walls. Good chairs. A plant that was real, not artificial, which Vivian had always considered either an oversight or a deliberate statement about something. She had called that morning. Clara Voss's assistant had found her a slot at 2 in the afternoon, which told her either the attorney wasn't busy or had been briefed enough to make room. Either way, Vivian drove downtown with the car's heat turned up because she was always cold now, and she parked in the underground garage and took the elevator up and sat across from Clara Voss at a desk that was covered in an organized arrangement of folders that Vivian had the distinct impression were always exactly that organized. Clara Voss was somewhere in her late 40s, angular face, short hair going silver at the temples, the kind of woman who had long ago stopped accommodating the idea that how she appeared was something she needed to manage for other people's comfort. She listened to everything Vivian said without writing anything down. She asked 2 questions during the account and 3 questions after. You have separate accounts, she said, in your name only. 3 of them. One is the account I had before we married. The other 2 I opened afterward. He knows about them. I didn't hide them, but they've never been connected to his businesses. Combined value, Vivian told her. Clara Voss nodded once, the nod of someone doing math in their head and finding the result adequate. The estate, Clara said. Title. Joint. His businesses, do you have any formal role, signature, authority, directorship, anything on paper? No, I was very careful about that. Good. She looked at Vivian directly. I want to be precise with you about something. Depending on what your husband's businesses are connected to and what legal actions follow from them, assets in a joint marital estate can become complicated to access. That's the primary concern for the near term, separate from the question of the marriage itself. She paused. When is your due date? 8 weeks. We need to move before that. I know. Not because of the marriage. That's a longer conversation, and we can have it after the baby is safe and you're recovered. But for asset protection, for establishing your independent legal position, there are steps we can take now that create much cleaner ground for everything that comes afterward. She pulled a single folder from the arrangement on her desk. I'm going to need some documentation from you. I'll have my assistant send you the list today. Vivian nodded. Her back was aching again, the low, constant pressure. She shifted in the chair and Clara Voss noticed and did not comment on it, which was the correct response. The phone call this morning, Vivian said, from the Hale woman. Does that change anything from a legal standpoint? Clara Voss considered this carefully. It changes the timeline. If what she told you is accurate, If your husband is in the middle of an active operation of the type she described, then the legal exposure that follows the conclusion of that operation could move very fast. Courts, asset freezes, depositions, subpoenas, all of it can land on a household within days of a public action. You want to be legally separated from that household's financial structure before that happens. I'm not going to run from him. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to protect yourself and your child. Clara met her eyes steadily. Those are not the same thing as abandonment, Mrs. Vescari. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal. It's a responsibility. Vivian looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded. She drove home in the afternoon light, the city moving past the windows in the way it always did, indifferent and continuous, and she thought about the word responsibility and decided that was a language she could work with. Damien had exactly 4 people he trusted completely. He had built his entire operation around the understanding that 4 was not a number to expand, because every person you added to that number was another surface through which the whole thing could crack. 4 was already 2 more than ideal. One of them was a man named Cord, who had been with him for 9 years and who Damien trusted not because Cord was loyal in the sentimental sense, but because Cord was rational, and Cord had correctly calculated 9 years ago and every year since that his interests were best served by Damien's continued success. This was the most reliable form of loyalty. It didn't require emotion. It didn't expire. Cord was waiting in the basement when Damien arrived at 11 in the morning, sitting at the folding table with a coffee that had gone cold and a look on his face that Damien recognized as the look of a man who had been thinking about how to say something for several hours. "Say it," Damien said, dropping his jacket over a chair. "Harlan's people moved a surveillance unit to the estate perimeter last night." The room did not change. Damien's face did not change. Something behind his face changed in a way that was invisible to everyone except possibly Cord, who had been watching him for 9 years and could read the specific quality of that stillness. "When?" 2 in the morning, 1 vehicle, switched out at 6 for a different vehicle, same registration pattern, clean plates cycling through a leased fleet. Very professional. "How far from the gate?" "Street parking, about 60 meters north. Line of sight to the front of the property, but not the interior." Damien sat down. He was very still for a moment, the kind of still that was the opposite of calm. They're not collecting intelligence. They're establishing a baseline. "That's what I thought." "Which means they're preparing to use it." He looked at the monitor. The camera that pointed at the estate's exterior feed showed the driveway, the gate, the garden wall. Empty. Quiet. The morning sun made it look peaceful. "Where is she right now?" "Left the property at 9, clinic appointment, then downtown. We tracked her to a building on Mercer, 14th floor, legal offices. Back at the estate at 4:15. Damien was quiet. "She called an attorney," Cord said. "Not a question." "Yes." Another pause. "Damien, if she's—" "I know what she's doing." His voice had no edge in it. It was simply a statement of fact. "She's protecting herself. She should be protecting herself. That's the correct response to the information available to her." Cord looked at him. "She doesn't know the right information." "No. She knows what looks like the right information, which is worse in some ways." He picked up the coffee, remembered it was Cord's, put it back down. "Where's Reyes?" "Meeting with the forensic unit. They may have the Harlan routing by end of day." "May." "That's what she said." Damien pressed 2 fingers to the space between his eyes. 8 weeks. The due date was 8 weeks out. He had told Reyes 10 days, and he had meant it, but Harlan, moving a surveillance unit to the perimeter of the estate in the middle of the night, was not something he had in the 10-day plan. That was acceleration. That was Harlan either getting nervous or getting bold, and he couldn't tell yet which one it was, and not knowing the difference was the kind of gap that got people hurt. "I need eyes on the vehicle," he said. 24-hour rotation. And I need you to move 2 of our people inside the estate perimeter without making it visible from the street." "Inside the property?" 2. Quiet positions. She doesn't need to know they're there." Cord's expression shifted slightly. "You're not going to tell her." "I'm going to tell her as much as I can tell her without compromising." "Damien." Cord's voice was even. She called an attorney. She's alone in that house, 7 months pregnant. Harlan's people are sitting 60 meters from her front gate. He paused. I've been with you for 9 years, and I'm not in the business of telling you things you don't want to hear, but I'm telling you this. The plan that made sense 3 months ago is not the same plan that makes sense right now. The silence between them had weight. The operation is a collection of financial transactions. She's your wife. She's about to have your child. Cord picked up his cold coffee and drank it anyway, which was the action of a man who had decided something. I'm not saying blow the operation. I'm saying you need to decide what the operation is actually for. Damien looked at the monitor, at the gate, at the garden. Get me the updated routing by tonight, he said, and get the 2 people inside the perimeter. Cord stood. And the other thing? Damien didn't answer. Cord left. But Vivian found the note on the kitchen counter at 6 in the evening. Not a handwritten note, a typed note, printed on plain paper, folded once. She had been reaching for a glass from the cabinet when she saw it sitting on the counter, and she stopped moving entirely because she was certain that note had not been there when she left that morning. She was certain because she had stood in this exact spot eating a piece of toast before leaving, and the counter had been empty. Someone had been inside the house. She stood there for a moment, not touching it, the glass still in her hand, her heart doing something rhythmically that was not quite its usual business. Then she picked up the note. It said, in plain type, no header, no signature. Stop talking to people you don't know. Stop moving money. Stay inside until you hear from D. She read it twice. She set the glass down without filling it. She took out her phone and called Damien, and this time, for the first time in 9 days, it didn't ring through to voicemail. He picked up on the second ring. His voice, when she heard it, did something to her that she had told herself it wasn't going to do anymore. It didn't matter. It happened anyway. Vivian. There was a note on my kitchen counter. She kept her voice level. Someone was inside the house. A pause that lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. In that second and a half, she could hear the quality of the silence around him, controlled, interior, the acoustics of a small room. Are you in the house right now? Yes, kitchen. Go to the bedroom, lock the door. I'll call you back in 4 minutes. Damien, 4 minutes. His voice was not cold. It was the opposite of cold. It was the voice of a man holding something carefully because he knew exactly what happened when you stopped holding it carefully. Please. She went to the bedroom. She locked the door. She sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her hands, and she looked at the room she had been sleeping in alone for 11 days, and she waited. He called back in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. 2 of my people are already on the property, he said. You're safe. The note was from someone watching the house. I need you to listen to me. Someone watching my house left a note on my kitchen counter. Yes. They were inside. Yes, they picked the service entrance. We've identified the access point and it's been secured. She was quiet. Through the locked bedroom door, the house was completely silent. You knew, she said. You knew there was someone watching this house. The pause this time was not a calculation. It was a man arriving at the edge of a decision he had been backing away from for weeks. She could feel it through the phone line, through the silence, through however many miles of distance were between them. Yes, he said. 2 letters. 1 syllable. The most honest thing he had said to her in longer than she could accurately measure. And you didn't tell me. No. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. The baby was still. How long? The surveillance started 2 days ago. The access, that was tonight. We didn't anticipate. How long have you known I was in danger? This pause was longer. The risk profile has been elevated for approximately 2 weeks. She stood up from the bed. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark garden and thought about 2 weeks. 2 weeks of blood pressure checks and attorney consultations and notes in a notebook and soup eaten from a pot and phone calls she made to herself in the car to try to keep from thinking too much. 2 weeks that he had known she was in danger and she had not known, and he had driven away 40 seconds in the doorway and not looked her in the eye. Vivian. Don't. Her voice was flat. Not angry in the way that is hot, angry in the way that is cold and very still. Don't say my name like that right now. He was quiet. I spoke to Sabrina Hale this morning. The silence that followed this sentence was a completely different kind of silence. It had specific texture and specific weight, and she had his complete, absolute, airless attention in a way she had not had for a very long time. "She called you," he said. It wasn't a question. "She called me. She told me she believes you've been using her as a collection point for some kind of operation. She told me she thinks people connected to her are going to look for leverage, and that I'm the obvious candidate." Vivian paused. "And then someone left a note on my kitchen counter telling me to stop talking to people I don't know and stop moving money and stay inside." The note wasn't from Sabrina's people. Then whose was it? Another pause. He was making a calculation. She could feel him making it, could feel the shape of what he was weighing, and she was tired. Deeply, structurally tired, the kind that doesn't come from not sleeping, of being on the outside of the calculation while being the subject of it. "Damien, whose note was it?" "It was from my side," he said. "A warning to make you take the threat seriously without—" He stopped. "Without me having to explain everything." The silence that came out of her then was not an absence of words. It was the presence of something that had been building for 2 months and was now fully formed and standing in the room. "A warning," she said, "sent by someone who broke into my house in the middle of my pregnancy instead of a phone call from my husband." He said nothing. "I want you to look at what you just told me," she said. "I want you to hear it back. You arranged for someone to enter my home without my knowledge to leave a note telling me to stay inside, rather than picking up a phone and treating me like a person capable of understanding whatever it is that's actually happening." Her voice did not shake. It was very clear and very even, and the evenness of it was worse than shaking would have been. "I am 31 weeks pregnant. I am in this house alone. I have been alone for 11 days, and I have been effectively alone for 2 months. And in all of that time, Damien, you have not told me one true thing." He said her name. "I asked you a question," she said. "Whose note was it? And the answer you gave me tells me everything I needed to know about how you see me in this situation." She looked at the dark garden through the glass. "I'm not going to run. This is my home and my pregnancy, and I'm not going to let you or Sabrina Hale or whoever left that note on my counter drive me out of my own house. But I want you to know something." "Vivian." "The lists I've been making," she said. "They're not going to stop." The line was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Something in it had been taken down from wherever it was kept and was out in the open air, which was not where it usually was. "I know I have no right to ask you anything right now." "No, but I need 3 more days. After that—" He stopped. "After that, I can tell you everything. All of it. Whatever you want to know." 3 days. She considered this. "And if something happens to me or this baby in 3 days, Damien, there is nothing on the other side of that. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Say it like you mean it." "I mean it," he said, and the way he said it meant he did. "Nothing happens to you. I will not let anything happen to you." She ended the call without saying goodbye. She unlocked the bedroom door and went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter where the note had been. And she thought about 3 days, and she thought about what it meant to believe something from someone who had been giving you the most careful, deliberate kind of nothing for 2 months. She thought about whether hope and stupidity were the same thing or only looked like the same thing from the outside. She opened the drawer beside the counter, and she got out the notebook, and she turned to the back pages, and she added 3 things to the list. The name of a private security firm she'd found online 6 days ago, the number for a hotel in the city with a medical suite on the 7th floor that her obstetrician had mentioned once in passing, and the phrase 3 days, underlined twice, with today's date beside it. Then she made tea because there was nothing else useful to do, and she stood at the kitchen window drinking it, watching the dark garden for movement. And twice she thought she saw something shift near the east wall, and remembered that Damien had said 2 of his people were on the property, and decided to believe that was what she was seeing and not something else, because the alternative was not a thing she could afford right now. Sabrina Hale did not sleep that night. This was not unusual. She had operated on 4 to 5 hours most of her adult life, a habit she had constructed deliberately in her 30s, when she understood that the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning, when everyone else's attention was elsewhere, were the most productive hours available. But this particular sleeplessness was different. It had a specific source. She sat at the desk in her hotel suite with the city below and a laptop open and 3 phones arranged to her left in order of which network they used. And she worked through the numbers that her internal analyst, a man named Felix, who was paid extremely well and who she had never met in person and hoped to maintain that policy with indefinitely, had sent her earlier that evening. The numbers were wrong. Not wrong in the way that indicated a math error. Wrong in the way that indicated someone else's hand had been in the sequence. A pattern she hadn't placed in the sequence was sitting in the sequence, neat and patient, like a word you've read so many times it stops looking like a word. She had almost missed it. She had only caught it because Felix had flagged an anomaly in transfer timing that she had then cross-referenced against 3 months of records and found the same anomaly, the same signature, 8 more times. Someone had been tagging her transactions, not blocking them, not diverting them, tagging them, leaving traceable markers in the data that were small enough not to trigger her own monitoring protocols and large enough to be read by someone who knew exactly what to look for. She sat back in her chair. Damien Viscari had not been collecting intelligence about the people she worked with. He had been building an evidentiary record of the transactions themselves. Every transfer, every routing path, every connection between her operation and Harlan's network above it. She picked up the middle phone and made a call. Harlan answered on the first ring, which meant he had been awake too. "We have a problem," she said. "I know," said Harlan. She paused. "You already know." "I've known for 6 days. I was waiting to see what you'd do." The specific quality of being watched without knowing it landed in her stomach in a way she did not show in her voice. "What do you want to do about Viscari?" "I want to do what you should have done 2 months ago when I first told you something was off." His voice was flat and certain, the voice of a man who has made a decision and is now informing you of it rather than consulting you. "I want leverage." His wife. His wife is 8 weeks from delivering his child. There is no more effective leverage than that on any man who has something to lose. A pause. Unless he doesn't. Does Viscari have something to lose? Sabrina looked at the city below the window. She thought about the phone call she had made to Vivian Cross that morning. She thought about what she had said and why she had said it and the calculation underneath it, which had been this. A wife who was frightened and running would create a crisis that might force Damien's hand, might destabilize the operation before it reached its conclusion, might buy time. What she had not calculated, she was now realizing, was that Harlan was having the same conversation on his end, and Harlan's version of buying time looked different from hers. "He has something to lose," she said. "Then we're agreed." "Harlan," she stopped. The word she had been about to say was wait, and she recognized, mid-syllable, that saying wait to Harlan in this conversation was going to produce the opposite of the effect she needed. "I'll be in contact," Harlan said, and the line went dead. Sabrina set the phone down. She looked at her laptop, at the numbers, at the tagged transactions sitting in the middle of 3 months of her work. Like Sabrina set the phone down and looked at the laptop screen and understood, with the particular clarity that arrives only when you have run out of time to misunderstand things, that she had made a mistake. Not a small mistake. Not the kind you correct with a phone call and an adjusted timeline. The kind that restructures everything that comes after it. Harlan was not waiting for her to manage the situation. Harlan had been watching her manage it for 6 days and had drawn his own conclusions about how it was going and had decided to move in the direction he always moved when patience stopped being useful. She had known this about him for 3 years. She had simply believed, as careful people sometimes fatally believe, that the rules of his behavior applied to other people and not to her. She opened a new window on the laptop and typed a single address into the search field. Not a website, an internal routing address, the kind that lived on a server she paid to maintain in a country with a specific relationship to information sharing agreements. She needed to know how fast Harlan could move. She needed to know what he had available in this city, in this time zone tonight. What came back in 40 seconds told her that Harlan had 3 active personnel within 12 miles of the estate where Vivian Cross was sleeping. Sabrina closed the laptop. She sat for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up the first phone. not the middle one she'd used for Harlan, the first one, the one connected to the only number she had for Damien that wasn't routed through a system she now had reason to believe was compromised. And she called it. It rang 7 times. No answer. She called it again. 7 rings. She put the phone down and stood up and went to the window and looked at the city and understood that she was now in a situation she had spent 15 years carefully constructing a life to avoid, which was a situation in which the most dangerous person in the immediate vicinity was the person she had most recently trusted. She started packing. Thought. The first contraction hit Vivian at 2:47 in the morning. She knew immediately it wasn't practice. She had felt the practice ones for 3 weeks, diffuse, tightening, irregular, the body rehearsing something it wasn't ready to perform yet. This was different. This was located. This had an address. It came from the lower right side and moved across her abdomen in a wave that lasted 40 seconds and left her gripping the edge of the bathroom sink with both hands, breathing through her teeth, watching her own face in the mirror and telling it to stay calm. She was 31 weeks and 4 days pregnant. She straightened when it passed. She looked at herself in the mirror, hair loose, face pale, the particular pallor of someone who has been not quite sleeping for weeks and is now being asked to perform something demanding. She put both hands on the sink and breathed. It was early. This was early. The baby was not due for 8 weeks. 8 weeks was not a margin you could simply compress. 8 weeks was the difference between a complication and a crisis, between manageable and not, between the version of this where everything was fine and the version she was not going to allow herself to picture. She walked to the bedside table and picked up her phone and called Dr. Fenwick's emergency line. The answering service picked up and she said the words 31 weeks, active contractions, and within 90 seconds, Fenwick herself was on the phone, voice even and focused, asking questions in a specific order that Vivian answered with the same precision she applied to everything, giving the relevant information without the irrelevant details, because this was not the moment for irrelevant details. How far apart? Fenwick said. That was the first one. 8 minutes ago. Duration? 40 seconds. Intensity? 1 to 10. Vivian thought about lying and decided not to. 7. A brief pause. I need you at the clinic. How quickly can you get there? 40 minutes. She stopped. She was going to say my husband's people are on the property. What she said instead was, I can drive. You cannot drive. Who do you have available? Vivian looked at the bedroom door. On the other side of it was a house that 2 of Damien's people were supposedly watching from somewhere in the darkness of the garden. She did not know their names. She did not have a way to contact them directly. She had a number Cord had texted her once, 3 weeks ago, that she had not deleted. I have someone, she said. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She ended the call and dialed Cord's number, and he picked up in 2 rings, which meant he had not been sleeping either, which told her something. She needs to go to the clinic, she said, because there was no time for preamble. Now, can you get someone to the house in the next 5 minutes? You're having contractions. Not a question. He had been briefed. Of course he had been briefed. Everyone in Damien's orbit was briefed on everything except her. Yes, 5 minutes, Cord. 3, he said. Go to the front door. She got dressed in the dark, one hand on the wall, when another contraction came at the 3-minute mark, shorter than the last one, 50 seconds, intensity maybe a 6. She wasn't sure anymore if she was calibrating correctly. She picked up the bag she had packed 6 weeks ago and kept by the closet door because she was someone who packed the bag early, who made the lists, who prepared for the thing she hoped wasn't coming. She had packed it for the right reasons, and now she was grateful in the specific way you are grateful for your own earlier caution. The front door opened onto a man she had seen twice before. One of Damien's, mid-30s, name she'd been told once and not retained. He had a car running at the end of the path. He said nothing except, I've got you, when she reached the bottom of the front steps, and she appreciated the economy of that. She was in the back seat and moving within 4 minutes of the phone call. She texted Damien, contractions, going to clinic, don't make this worse. She put the phone face down on the seat and watched the dark road through the window and breathed through the next one at the 12-minute mark, which was too fast. She knew it was too fast, and she focused on the breathing and not on what too fast meant. Cord called Damien at 2:51 in the morning. Damien was not asleep. He had not been asleep. He was in a car parked 3 blocks from the hotel where Sabrina had been staying because Reyes had called him 40 minutes ago to tell him that the forensic unit had cracked the Harlan routing. All of it, the secondary accounts, the offshore layers, the complete chain, and that she was preparing to move within 24 hours, and that she needed him available and in position and not doing anything unilateral. He had told her fine, and she had told him not to do anything unilateral again, more specifically this time, and he had said fine again, and then he had gotten in the car and driven to 3 blocks from the hotel because he was someone who said fine and then sat 3 blocks from the hotel. When Cord called, he picked up immediately. "She's in labor," Cord said. The car was very quiet. "How early?" 31 weeks. Martinez is driving her to Fenwick's clinic. She's... A pause. "She's okay. Contracting, but okay." Damien's hand on the phone was completely still. His chest was doing something that he was not going to examine right now. There was a specific internal process he had developed over 15 years for situations that required him to be functional in circumstances that made functionality difficult, and he engaged it now. Not suppression, because suppression failed under pressure, but compartmentalization, which was different. The feeling went into a specific location where it would remain until he had time to address it properly. It went there. He closed the door. "Stay on her," he said. "I want Martinez on the phone to you the whole drive." "Already done." "The 2 on the property. Reposition to follow. She's not alone." "Good." He was already reaching for the door handle. "I'm going to the clinic." Reyes said, "I know what Reyes said." He got out of the car. His phone vibrated in his hand. Vivian's text. He read it standing on the sidewalk in the cold at 2:53 in the morning. "Don't make this worse." He put the phone in his pocket and walked fast toward where his other car was parked 2 streets over. His driver was already on the phone, already pulling around the block, already reading him without needing to be told. 9 years. Everyone around him had been 9 years or more. He was 2 minutes from the car when his phone rang again. Not Cord, not Vivian, not Reyes. A number he recognized and had not expected to hear from tonight. Sabrina Hale. He stopped walking. He answered. "They have her," Sabrina said, and her voice was wrong. Not the rehearsed, smooth instrument she always deployed, but something stripped of that, something underneath it. Harlan's people. They were watching the estate, and when she left, a sound on the line that was not quite breath. They followed the car. "Damien, they have your wife." The pavement under his feet was the same pavement. The cold air was the same cold air. Everything was exactly as it had been 4 seconds ago. "Where?" he said. "I don't know yet. I'm trying to—" "Where is Martinez?" "I don't know who—" "The driver. My man driving her. Where is he?" "Damien. The car was intercepted on Whitmore Road. They used 2 vehicles. I have someone tracking the—" He ended the call and called Cord. Cord answered, saying, "I know," before Damien could speak, which meant Cord already knew, which meant Martinez was down or out of contact, which meant something had happened in the last 4 minutes that had been invisible to every system he had running. "Find her," Damien said. His voice was a specific, pressurized flat. "Everything we have. Now." "Already running." Cord. "I know." He was running. God. The car smelled like leather and something chemical underneath it, the kind of industrial cleaner that is used on surfaces that need to be very clean for reasons other than hygiene. Vivian registered this before she registered anything else. Smell first, then sound, then the specific quality of the darkness, which was complete. Something over her eyes. Not tight enough to hurt, but secure enough to work. She was sitting. Her hands were not restrained. This was a choice someone had made deliberately, that the pregnant woman would not be restrained, because restraining a pregnant woman created particular problems that whoever had made this decision had decided to avoid. She noted this. She noted it with the part of her that was still running, still functional, the part that had been making lists for 2 months because making lists was the alternative to falling apart. She was in a vehicle, moving. She could feel the motion, turns, what felt like a highway entrance because of the speed increase, and she counted seconds until they turned again. Not a short drive. Somewhere outside the city center. Another contraction. This one was worse. It peaked at something she would have said was an 8 if asked, and she breathed through it with her hands on her stomach and her jaw locked, because she was not going to make sound for the benefit of whoever was in this car with her. She would not give them that. She focused on the breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. 4 counts. 4 counts. The way the clinic pamphlet had described. And she had read 3 times and dismissed as oversimplified, and was now extremely grateful for. It passed. She became aware of a person to her left. She could feel the warmth and weight of someone sitting close, not touching her, present. "How far apart are they?" said a voice. Male, older, unhurried. She said nothing. "I'm asking because we have a specific window of time before the situation becomes medical in a way that limits our options." The voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind in tone, if not in substance. "I'd prefer to keep this manageable, so I'm asking." "About 10 minutes, she said. "Okay." A pause. "We're 20 minutes from where we're going. You'll have access to someone with medical training. I need a hospital. You need to help us first." She kept her hands on her stomach. The baby was not moving. This was not unusual. Stress could cause the baby to go quiet, but she tracked it, logged it, held it in the list of things she was managing. "What do you want?" she said. "We want to know where your husband keeps the primary documentation for the operation he's been running." A pause. "Not the digital records. Those we can get. The physical documentation, the signed instruments, the originals." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mrs. Vescari." Patient. The tone of someone who has time and knows it. "You called an attorney yesterday. You've been quietly moving assets for 2 weeks. You are not a woman who doesn't pay attention to what's happening around her." A slight shift in the seat beside her. "We're not asking you to betray your husband. We're asking you to tell us where documents are kept that we believe are in or near your marital home. That's all." "That's all," she repeated. "Yes." "You intercepted a car carrying a woman in preterm labor," she said, "and you want me to believe that's all." A brief silence. "The documents," the voice said again, the patient's wearing the thinnest it had yet. "Where does he keep them?" "I don't know," Vivian said. And that was true. She genuinely did not know. In 4 years of marriage, she had made it her explicit practice not to know things that would put her in exactly this situation. And she appreciated now, in a way that was almost darkly funny, the particular foresight of that. "I believe you believe that," the voice said. "It's the truth." Another contraction. She breathed through it and did not make a sound, and it lasted 55 seconds, and when it ended, she was sweating despite the cold in the car, and her hands were shaking slightly, which she controlled by pressing them more firmly against her stomach. 10 minutes, she said when it passed. That one was 10 minutes. A silence. "Tell your driver to go faster," she said. "What?" The compound was not what she had pictured. She had not been picturing anything, because picturing the destination was not a useful activity. But if she had, it would not have been this. A building that looked like a converted industrial facility, wide and low, set back from the road behind a chain-link perimeter. Inside, concrete floors, high ceilings, the echo of a space that had been designed for machines and was now being used for people. Strip lighting. The smell of that chemical cleaner, stronger here. They removed the covering from her eyes. She blinked in the white light and took in the room and the people in it, committing what she could to memory because that was what you did. The man beside her in the car was older than she had expected from the voice. Late 60s, compact, well-dressed in the particular way of someone who considers clothing a tool rather than an expression. He was looking at her with the flat assessment of someone performing a calculation. 3 other men in the room, one near the far door, 2 closer, both watching her with the particular careful attention people give to situations they've been told require care. A woman she did not recognize was coming toward her from the far end of the room, mid-40s, moving with purpose, wearing clothes that were practical rather than industrial. She was the one with medical training. She had a blood pressure cuff. "Sit," the compact man said, indicating a chair that had been positioned in the center of the room in a manner that was clearly deliberate. The kind of chair that says, "You are in the center of this. You do not get a wall to put your back to." Vivian sat. The woman with the blood pressure cuff reached her and said nothing, just took her arm and applied the cuff with efficient movements, and Vivian allowed it because her blood pressure was now an actual medical concern and not a political one. "Elevated?" the woman said to the compact man. Not to Vivian, to him. He nodded. "How elevated?" "Manageable. For now." He looked at Vivian. "My name is Harlan. I want you to understand that I am not someone who causes harm to pregnant women or children. That is not what I'm doing here, and it is not what I intend to do." "And yet," Vivian said. "And yet," he acknowledged, "sometimes the situation is what it is." He sat down across from her in a chair that was not in the center of the room. "Your husband has spent the last 8 months building a case that will, if it proceeds to its conclusion, dismantle a network of financial operations that represent 11 years of my work and the work of a significant number of people who depend on that work continuing." He folded his hands in his lap. "I don't want the case to proceed to its conclusion." "Then you should talk to my husband." "Your husband is not available for conversation." He said this in the tone of someone reporting a weather condition. "But you are." "I told you, I don't know where he keeps—" "I heard you." He shifted slightly in his chair. "I'm not asking about documents anymore. I want you to call him." Vivian stopped. "I want you to call your husband," Harlan said. "Tell him where you are. Tell him that the situation has a simple resolution. He provides us the digital credentials to the financial documentation he's assembled. We delete the evidentiary record, and you go to whatever hospital you need to go to tonight." He looked at her with the expression of a man who is saying something reasonable and knows it. "That's the entire ask. One phone call." She looked at him. "He will come," she said. "You know that. You're not asking me to call him for the credentials. You're asking me to call him so he comes here." A brief, genuine pause. "You're very clear-headed for a woman who's been in the back of a car for 25 minutes in early labor. Answer the question." "Both things can be true," Harlan said. "The credentials and your husband in the same room are both useful to me. I'm being honest with you about that." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a phone on the small table between them. Her phone. They had taken it in the car. "Call him." She looked at the phone. Another contraction. This one built faster than the others and hit harder, and she had to work to keep her face from changing, to keep the breath controlled, to keep every visible surface of herself from telling this room how much she was not okay right now. She succeeded. Barely. When it passed, Harlan was still watching her. "That was closer than 10 minutes, he said. "I know," she said. "Call him." She picked up the phone. But Bartosen. Damien's phone rang at 3:31 in the morning, and when he saw the number, he was already in the second car, already moving, cord on the line in his earpiece, feeding him location data from a tracker they had on Martinez's vehicle that had gone dark 16 minutes ago at the last known position on Whitmore Road. He answered. "I'm here," he said before she could speak. "I know." Her voice was controlled. He knew what that control cost. He knew exactly what it cost because he knew her and he had spent 2 months pretending not to. And the sound of her voice under that control, in whatever room she was in, did something to the inside of his chest that he did not have time for and could not stop. "Are you hurt?" "Not yet. The baby—" "I'm 31 weeks, Damien. The contractions are—" She stopped. "Closer." "I'm coming." "I know you are." A pause. "There's a man here named Harlan who wants you to come. I want you to know that so you're not walking into anything without knowing." He heard someone in the background say something he couldn't quite make out. "I'm telling him what he needs to know," Vivian said, presumably to that person, in a tone that closed the conversation. Then back to him. "He wants credentials for the financial documentation." "I don't care what he wants." "Damien," her voice dropped a half register. "He has medical personnel here, but I need a hospital and I need it soon, so whatever you're planning—" Another pause, and he could hear through the phone, through the enforced stillness of her breathing, that something was happening with her body that she was managing with everything she had. "Be fast. The line went quiet. He still had her connected. He could hear the ambient sound of wherever she was, the echo of a large interior space, the slight hollow resonance of concrete. "Cord," he said. "Got the trace off the call. 14 miles east, industrial quarter, Brennan Street corridor." Cord was already running it. "I have 2 possible structures from satellite. Get me Reyes." "She's going to tell you to wait for C. Get me Reyes." Reyes picked up in 40 seconds, which meant she had been monitoring and was not surprised. "Damien." "They have Vivian." A pause that lasted 1 second. "I know. We've been tracking the intercept since. I'm going in." "You cannot go in. If you breach that compound before we have units in position, you trigger a situation that—" "Reyes." His voice was extremely quiet, which was what his voice became when he was past the point of performance. "She is 31 weeks pregnant and in active labor in a concrete building 14 miles east of where I'm sitting. Tell me something useful, or get out of my way." A silence. "We need 40 minutes to position," she said. "We have a tactical unit that can I don't have 40 minutes. Damien, how many do you have that can move in 20? Another silence. He could hear her calculating. 6, she said. "Armed, but without—" 20 minutes. Brennan Street corridor. I'll tell you which structure when Cord confirms it." He paused. "And Reyes. Bring everything. We're not running a quiet operation tonight." She said something he was fairly sure was profanity, and then, "Don't go in until we're in position." "I make no promises," he said. He hung up. In the back seat of the car moving fast through dark streets, he unbuttoned the top button of his jacket and reached into the interior pocket and checked the weight and condition of what was there and found it satisfactory. His driver was watching him in the rear-view mirror. "Brennan corridor," Damien said, "and push it." And Tien. The compound had one entrance on the south side that the satellite image showed clearly, and at least one additional access point on the east perimeter that was structural and not accounted for in the building's original registration. Cord told him this while he was still 4 minutes out. He told him there were 7 heat signatures inside, 3 grouped near the center of the main floor, 2 near the south entrance, 1 near the east wall, and 1 moving between positions. 7. And 1 was Vivian. He told Cord to get the 2 people from the estate perimeter moving toward his position, and then he called a man named Dutch, who was the 3rd of the 4 people he trusted completely, and who had once, in a warehouse in a different city under different circumstances, kept Damien alive for 6 minutes through a situation that should not have been survivable. And he told Dutch where he was going, and Dutch said he'd be there in 12 minutes. He thought about the contractions, the timing she had told him on the phone, the sound of her breathing. He thought, 12 is too long. The car stopped at the outer perimeter. He got out. The night was cold and clear, the industrial corridor dark except for the specific dark of buildings that are being used rather than empty. The dark that has edges, that has the suggestion of light behind it. He moved on foot toward the east wall. From inside the building, at that same moment, Vivian was listening to a conversation that the compact man named Harlan was having on his phone. A conversation she was not meant to hear, but the room was large and hollow, and sound moved in it in ways the people in it had perhaps not accounted for. She heard 2 words clearly, just 2, from Harlan's end of the line. "Burn it." She didn't know what it referred to. She knew, with the specific instinct of someone who has been paying attention and surviving on that attention for 2 months, that it wasn't nothing. She looked at the woman with the blood pressure cuff, who had moved to the far side of the room. She looked at the man near the south entrance, whose posture had changed in the last 30 seconds in the way that posture changes when someone has received an instruction. She picked up her phone from the table where Harlan had left it. She typed a single word to Damien. "Now." Harlan turned from his call and looked at her. He looked at the phone in her hand. His expression moved through something. Not anger, something more complex than anger. Something in the category of a man who has been outmaneuvered by a variable he underestimated. "Put the phone down," he said. "No," said Vivian Cross, and she did not put the phone down. And outside in the cold at the east perimeter wall of the compound, the man coming over it read the message and moved faster than the 12 minutes Dutch had promised, and didn't stop until he reached the door that was not supposed to be there and went through it. And what happened after that was the beginning of the door came off its frame. Not dramatically, Not the way doors come off frames in the kind of stories that aren't interested in accuracy. It came off because the latch was old and the frame was industrial-era steel that had been installed without proper anchoring, and Damien hit it at a specific angle with his full weight behind it, and it gave, and he was inside. The east corridor was narrow and unlit except for the bleed of the strip lighting from the main floor ahead. Concrete walls, concrete floor, a smell of dust and that chemical cleaner that was stronger here than it had been outside. He moved through it fast and quiet, right hand holding the Glock he'd pulled from his jacket before going over the wall, left hand trailing the corridor wall for orientation in the dark. His breathing was controlled. It was always controlled. The control was not calm. It was something that existed alongside everything else, the parallel track, the operational function running concurrent with everything that was happening in the rest of him that he was not going to look at right now. He heard voices from the main floor. He stopped at the edge of the corridor where it opened into the larger space and put his back against the wall and looked. The strip lighting made the space white and shadowless. He could see Vivian in the chair at the center. She was upright, hands on her stomach, chin level, alive. He absorbed that information and let it do what it did and moved past it immediately because the alternative was not functional. Harlan was standing now, phone no longer in his hand, body turned toward the south entrance, where one of his men had just come through the door, saying something in a low, urgent voice. The second man near the south entrance had his hand inside his jacket. The woman with the medical kit was at the far wall, frozen in the posture of someone who had just understood that the next few minutes were going to require a decision about which side of the room to be on. 3 active threats visible. The man near the east wall, the one Cord had tracked moving between positions, was not currently in his sightline, which meant he was either behind the structural column to the right or somewhere outside the main floor. 7 heat signatures. 1 was Vivian. 3 in the center cluster, Vivian, Harlan, and the medical woman. 2 at the south entrance. 1 at the east wall that he couldn't see. 1 he couldn't account for. He needed the unaccounted one before he moved. He had approximately 30 seconds before the man at the east wall came back into a position where he would see the open corridor door. Damien looked at Vivian. She was looking at the south entrance with Harlan. She had not looked toward the east corridor. She had sent the word now, and she was not looking for him because looking for him would tell the room where to look. She was sitting in the center of that white light with her hands on her stomach, and she was giving him the room. He loved her in a way that had no appropriate time or place to be articulated, so he didn't articulate it. He moved. He came through the corridor opening low and fast, moving right toward the structural column before anyone at the south entrance had completed the half-turn that the sound of his movement initiated. He reached the column and put his back to it, and the man from the south entrance, the one with his hand already inside his jacket, had his weapon up now, pointing at the column, shouting something at Harlan, who was shouting something back. "Damien!" Harlan's voice cut through the shouting with the authority of a man accustomed to cutting through things. "There's no version of what you're thinking that ends well for anyone in this room." Damien said nothing. He was reading the room around the column's edge. The man at South Entrance 1 had moved left, which put him at a bad angle for a shot at the column, but a better angle for coverage of the center of the room. Vivian was still in the chair, still upright. "I have 6 people in this building," Harlan said. "You've seen 3. 4, Damien said. "The one you have behind the far column on the right thinks he's outside my line of sight. He's not." A pause. He used it to confirm the heat signature Cord had tracked near the east wall. The man had come back into his peripheral vision on the right side, exactly where he'd said. He was holding a position, not moving yet, waiting for instruction. "You came alone," Harlan said. "No. I have people outside this. They're handled." He wasn't certain of this. Dutch was 12 minutes out when he'd last talked to him, and that had been 9 minutes ago. But certainty was not always the available currency. "Reyes has 6 units in position at the perimeter. You know the name Reyes." He could hear, in the specific quality of the silence that followed, that Harlan did know the name Reyes. "She's federal," Harlan said. It was not a question. It was a man calculating. "She has everything, the routing, the accounts, the documentation, all of it transmitted 4 hours ago. What's in this building tonight is not the operation anymore, Harlan. The operation is done. What's in this building is just the part where you decide whether you walk out or you don't. Another silence, longer this time. The credentials, Harlan said. If I have the digital, you don't. Damien kept his voice even. There's nothing I can give you that changes what Reyes has. I want you to hear that clearly. Whatever you thought tonight was going to accomplish, it's done. It was done before your people touched that car. He heard Vivian make a sound. Not a word. A breath, controlled and pressurized, the sound of someone writing out something physical. It lasted about 45 seconds and then went quiet. The room had heard it too. She needs a hospital, Harlan said, and the calculation in his voice had shifted by approximately 1 degree in the direction of something that was not quite human concern but was adjacent to it. You know that. Then let her go. And you. Me you can keep. Let her walk out the south entrance and I stay in this room and we negotiate whatever you think there is to negotiate. A pause. You do that. She's 31 weeks and in active labor in a concrete building. Yes, I'd do that. Another breath from Vivian's direction. He did not look. He kept his eyes on the positions he had mapped and the two he hadn't fully confirmed. Damien. Her voice, when it came, was low and very clear and had the specific quality of someone choosing every word with deliberate weight. Don't. He said nothing. Look at me. He looked. She was looking directly at him across the white-lit room, not at the south entrance, not at Harlan, at him. Her face was pale and wet at the temples, and her jaw was tight, and she had both hands flat against her stomach, and she was looking at him with the expression of a woman who has been alone in a house for 11 days and has been making lists and has arrived, through that process, at a very specific and fully formed position. Don't you dare trade yourself for me, she said. Not after all of this. Vivian, I mean it. The man at the south entrance shifted his weight. Harlan raised one hand slightly. Not a signal to fire, a signal to hold. He was still calculating. You could see it on him, the specific frozen quality of a man who has been in enough rooms to know when the room is changed in a way that his plan didn't account for. The south door opened, not from the inside, from the outside. It came open fast and hard, and Dutch came through it first, which answered the question of whether 12 minutes had elapsed, and 2 men came through behind him whose names Damien didn't know, but whose movements he recognized as Reyes's people. Trained, controlled, the particular economy of motion that comes from specific institutional preparation. The man at south entrance one spun. Dutch was already on him. Not a shot, a physical takedown, fast and close quarters, and efficient in the way that Dutch was efficient, which was the way of someone for whom efficiency was not a preference but a survival mechanism developed over a long time in situations that did not permit inefficiency. The second man at the south entrance raised his weapon, and Damien came around the column and closed the distance in 4 steps and hit the weapon arm at the elbow, not the wrist. The elbow, which was the joint that when struck correctly in the correct direction produced an immediate and involuntary release. And the weapon hit the concrete floor, and Damien had the man's arm locked behind him before the echo of it had finished. The man near the far column on the right did not move. He had looked at Dutch and the 2 federal adjacent people who had come through the south door, and he had made a calculation that resulted in him putting his hands up and taking 2 steps away from the column and standing still, which was the correct calculation. That left Harlan. Harlan had not moved during any of this. He was standing in the same position he had been standing in, hands at his sides, watching the room with the expression of a man watching a situation arrive at a conclusion he had considered possible and had not adequately waited. He was not reaching for anything. He was not backing toward any exit. He was simply standing there in the white light looking at the math. Damien handed the man he was holding to one of Reyes's people and walked toward Harlan, and Harlan watched him come. And when he was 3 feet away, Harlan said, "The operation is really done." Yes. All of it. All of it. Harlan looked at him for a moment with the specific expression of a man who has spent 11 years building something and is now looking at the place where it was. Then he said, "I want an attorney before I say anything else." "That's your right," Damien said. Reyes came through the south door at that moment, She had been outside, coordinating, and she came in with the specific energy of someone who has run from a vehicle to a building and is managing the visible effects of that. She looked at the room. She looked at Damien. She looked at Harlan. "Harlan Voss," she said, "you're going to want to sit down." Harlan sat down. Reyes's people moved through the room, and Dutch had the south entrance man secured, and the man from the far column was being walked toward the door with his hands up. And Damien turned from all of it and walked to where Vivian was sitting in the chair in the center of the room. She looked up at him when he reached her. He crouched down in front of the chair, so they were at eye level. He put his hands over hers, which were still pressed flat against her stomach. Her hands were cold. Her face was still pale and still wet at the temples, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read because it contained too many things at once: relief and anger and exhaustion, and something else that was underneath all of those and had been there for 4 years and had not, apparently, gone away. "Hi," he said. It was a deeply inadequate word. It was the only word available. "Hi," she said back. Another contraction. He felt it in her hands before she showed it anywhere on her face. The tension moving through them, the grip tightening fractionally. She breathed through it. He kept his hands over hers and didn't move and didn't speak because this was not the moment for speech. This was the moment for being there, which he should have been doing for 2 months and hadn't, and he was doing it now. 40 seconds, 50. The contraction peaked and began to release, and she exhaled. Long, slow, controlled. And her grip eased. 7 minutes, she said. I know, we're going. He stood and got his arm behind her, supporting her weight as she got up from the chair, which was not a fast process but was a steady one. She was steady. She had always been steady. He had built an entire operation on the premise that he needed to keep her away from the danger, and in doing so had created a different and equally unacceptable danger, and she had navigated it steadier than he deserved. "The baby," she said as they moved toward the south door. "She's been quiet." "She's okay," he said. He didn't know this. He said it anyway because some things need to be said by someone. "You don't know that." "No. But we're going to find out in about 4 minutes because my car is outside and we're going to Fenwick's clinic, and that's the next thing." She was walking. Slowly, with his arm, but walking. "The next thing. That's all we need right now." Dutch held the south door. The night air hit them when they came through it, cold and clean, the industrial corridor dark around them, the perimeter lit by the headlights of 3 vehicles that were Reyes's tactical unit, plus his own car 15 meters away with the driver already out and the rear door open. Vivian stopped walking for a moment when they got outside. She stopped and stood in the cold air and looked up, and he didn't know what she was looking at. The sky, the dark, some internal geography he wasn't privy to. And he waited. "Okay," she said. They walked to the car. Dr. Fenwick was already at the clinic when they arrived. She had the look of a woman who had been called at 2:50 in the morning and had been in the building since 3:15 and was operating now on the particular fuel of professional focus that did not require sleep. She looked at Vivian when they came through the door, and she looked at Damien, and she made no comment on any of the visible information and said, "This way." And that was the end of the social portion of the evening. They put Vivian in a room with monitoring equipment, and Fenwick did the examination with the specific, efficient focus of someone who needed information before she could do anything else, and was getting it as fast as the process allowed. Damien stood near the wall. He had been told he could wait outside, but he had not waited outside. He was standing near the wall, which was the compromise he had arrived at unilaterally. "The baby's position is good," Fenwick said, reading the monitor. "Heart rate is elevated, but within range for the circumstances." She looked at Vivian. "The contractions are real, but they're not progressing the way active labor would progress. Your body responded to the stress. That's what this is." "She's not coming tonight," Vivian said. "Not if we can help it. I want to get a tocolytic on board, medication to slow the contractions, and I want to monitor you for the next 4 hours." She looked at Damien for the first time since they'd arrived. "Is the stress situation resolved?" "Yes," he said. Fenwick looked at him for a moment longer than that single-word answer probably warranted in the way of someone deciding whether to say something. She decided not to. She went back to the monitor. 4 hours, she said to Vivian. And then we talk about what the next 8 weeks look like and how we keep you out of a situation like this one. Agreed, Vivian said. Fenwick left to get the medication. Damien remained near the wall. The room was small and lit in the way medical rooms are lit, functional, without warmth, designed for visibility over comfort. The monitor on Vivian's stomach tracked the baby's heartbeat in a green line on a small screen, regular, steady. He found himself looking at it in a way that was not clinical. She really is quiet, Vivian said. She was looking at the monitor too. She's listening, Damien said. Vivian looked at him. He wasn't sure why he'd said that. It was not the kind of thing he usually said. But Vivian's expression didn't indicate he'd said the wrong thing. It indicated something more complicated, which was that he'd said something she wasn't going to argue with right now, and that was its own kind of territory. A nurse came in and set up the IV line, and the tocolytic started, and within 20 minutes the contractions had spaced out and softened to something that the monitor reported as manageable. Vivian's blood pressure came down 3 points. Damien watched the numbers. He stood near the wall and watched the numbers and the heartbeat line and did not leave. At some point after 4 in the morning, Vivian said, "You need to sit down." He looked at her. "You've been standing by that wall for 40 minutes. She shifted slightly on the bed. "There's a chair?" He sat in the chair beside the bed. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor between his feet and said nothing for a moment, and then he said, "I need to tell you some things." "I know. All of it." "I know, Damien." She was looking at the ceiling. Her voice was tired in the way that is not simply the absence of sleep. "Not tonight. Okay? Tonight I just—" She stopped. "Tonight I just need to know she's okay." He looked at the monitor, at the green line, steady and continuous. "She's okay." Vivian closed her eyes. He sat in the chair by the bed and he looked at her face. The exhaustion in it, the pallor, the controlled features of a woman who had been holding herself together with the specific material of her own will for a very long time. And he thought about the note on the kitchen counter and the attorney on the 14th floor and the lists in the notebook she kept by the bed. And he thought about the particular loneliness of being someone who is capable of taking care of herself and has to, and he understood, in a way that he had known theoretically but was now understanding in a way that had weight, that capability and necessity are not the same thing, and that Vivian had been doing the necessary thing because the necessary thing was all that was available, and that this was a failure he owned completely. The monitor ran its line across the screen. Steady, uninterrupted. At 4:42, Dr. Fenwick came back and looked at the readings and said, "Better," in a tone that was not effusive but contained a specific kind of satisfaction. She adjusted something on the monitor and told Vivian she wanted to run one more check at 6, and if the numbers held, they could talk about going home in the morning. After Fenwick left, Vivian opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then she looked at Damien and she said, "Sabrina Hale." "Yes." "She's part of the operation you've been running." "Yes." "Was she ever—" She stopped. Started again with more precision. "Was any of what I saw, what everyone saw, real?" He met her eyes directly. "No." The silence that followed this was the silence of a woman processing something she had, on some level, perhaps already known, and finding the confirmation still had its own specific weight, even when you thought you were prepared for it. "The gifts," she said. "The trips. All of it. Monitored assets. Every transaction logged and tracked. Every public appearance photographed for evidentiary record. The whole thing was—" He stopped. It was a mechanism. She was the mechanism. None of it was— He looked for the word and found it. Personal. But she didn't know that. No, she knew something was off at the end. That's why she called you. He paused. "I didn't anticipate that. That was a variable I didn't control." "You didn't control me calling an attorney either." "No." "Or moving money." "No." She was looking at him steadily. "Good." He understood what she meant by that. He nodded. She looked back at the ceiling. The woman who was in that building tonight, with the blood pressure cuff. Was she going to... Harlan had told her to manage the situation medically. She wasn't there to cause harm. He paused. I know it doesn't change it. Her voice was flat, not angry, just precise. She was there because your operation put me in that building, Damien, whatever her individual intentions were. Yes, he said. That's true. She looked at him again. You know that. I know that. The monitor ran its line. The room was quiet except for the machine and the distant sound of the clinic's ventilation system and the particular specific silence of two people who have a very large conversation ahead of them that neither is going to have tonight because tonight is not the night for it, and both of them know it. Vivian's hand moved on the bed, not toward him, sideways resting on the mattress between them. Open. He put his hand over hers. She didn't close her fingers around it. She let it rest. He let it rest. That was what was available, and it was enough for now. Reyes called it 5:15. He stepped out of the room to take it, into the corridor where the lights were dim and a nurse moved at the far end with the quiet purpose of someone doing the 4 a.m. portion of a long shift. Harlan is in custody, Reyes said. So are 4 of the 6 people from the compound. 2 we're still locating. A pause. The federal case is moving to filing. We're looking at charges across 3 jurisdictions. The documentation holds. The documentation is airtight. 8 months of it. Another pause. You delivered exactly what you said you would. He leaned against the corridor wall. Through the small window in the room door, he could see Vivian in the bed. The monitor's green line, the IV line, the specific quiet of a person resting under duress. And Sabrina Hale. We picked her up at the airport at 4:10. She was at the gate. A beat. She cooperated immediately. Full statement. Names, accounts, the Harlan structure above her. Everything. She was trying to negotiate a deal before we'd even formally arrested her. He thought about the phone call in the car. The voice that had been stripped of its surface. They have her. She called me tonight. I know. We heard it. Reyes paused in a way that indicated she was choosing her next sentence. She may have saved your wife's life. The early warning. If she hadn't called when she did, you'd have been 14 minutes further behind. He said nothing. I'm not telling you to be grateful to her, Reyes said. I'm telling you the record reflects what the record reflects. Fine. Damien. Her voice shifted very slightly. Not warmer, but different in some quality he associated with her stepping outside the federal agent role by about 2 degrees. The baby. Stable. They're monitoring her until morning. Good. She let that sit for a moment. The operation is closed. Your cooperation agreement is fulfilled. Whatever happens next is... She stopped. That's your business. Yes. Stay out of my jurisdiction for a while. That's the plan, he said. He went back into the room. Vivian was not asleep. She was lying with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling, which he was beginning to understand was a thing she did when she was thinking through something she wasn't ready to say yet. He sat back down in the chair. That was Reyes, he said. I assumed. It's done. All of it. She kept looking at the ceiling. Harlan is in custody. The case is moving to filing. He paused. Sabrina Hale is cooperating with federal investigators. A brief quiet. It's done, he said again, because it seemed like the kind of thing that needed to be said twice. Vivian turned her head and looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking, and in that moment something crossed her face that was too complex to name. It was not forgiveness. It was not the absence of forgiveness. It was something that existed before either of those things. Something in the category of a woman who has survived a night that should not have been survivable and is now sitting with the person most responsible for it being the night it was. 8 weeks, she said. Yes. We have 8 weeks. Yes. She looked back at the ceiling. Then you'd better figure out what you're going to say. He sat in the chair in the dim room beside the woman who had sat in a center chair in a concrete building and not broken and had sent him a single word at exactly the right moment. And he thought about 8 weeks, and he thought about what he was going to say, and for the first time in a very long time, He was not thinking about operations or timing or the cost of things. He was thinking about the green line on the monitor and the open hand on the mattress and the fact that the next 8 weeks were going to require a different kind of precision than anything he had spent the last 11 years developing, and he was going to have to build it from scratch, and he was going to have to be honest, which was the hardest. The hardest thing was not the conversation. The hardest thing was the weeks before the conversation, when both of them were in the same house again, and the house was no longer quiet in the same way it had been quiet before. It was quiet in a different way, the way of two people who have too much to say and not yet the right conditions to say it, moving around each other in the kitchen and the hallway with a careful, deliberate consideration that was its own form of communication. Elena Cross-Vescari was born 7 weeks later, at 6:41 in the morning, in the same clinic where her mother had spent 4 hours on a monitor the night of the compound. She came into the world at full term, which was the outcome Fenwick had worked toward and achieved through 4 more appointments and 2 additional rounds of monitoring, and the particular focused stubbornness of a woman who was not going to let her body be rushed by anyone, not even herself. She weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces, and she came out with her eyes already open, which Fenwick said was not unusual, and which Damien, standing at Vivian's left side with his hand where Vivian had put it without being asked, found he was unable to look away from for longer than he was comfortable admitting. They named her Elena because it had been Vivian's grandmother's name, and because when Damien said it aloud in the room for the first time, something in his voice changed in a way that made Vivian look at him and not look away. And that was enough. The conversation came 6 days after they brought Elena home. It came on a Tuesday morning when the baby was asleep in the room down the hall, and the house was in that specific morning stillness where the light comes through the kitchen windows at a low angle and makes everything look like it has been arranged deliberately. Vivian had made coffee. Damien had sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. She put a cup in front of him and sat across from him, and she said, "Tell me all of it." He told her all of it. It took 2 hours. He told her about Reyes, about the original approach 11 months ago, about the structure of the operation and why it required what it required. He told her about the monitored transactions and the evidentiary record and the tagged accounts. He told her about Harlan and what Harlan represented, and why dismantling Harlan's network had required the specific architecture of an operation built from the inside, through proximity, through a public relationship with someone positioned at the center of the money flow. He told her about the decision to keep her away from it and why. And he told her this in the same flat, direct voice he had used for everything else, without softening it into something more defensible, because she had asked for all of it, and all of it was what she deserved. He told her about the night he had stood in the doorway for 40 seconds. He told her he had known, standing there, that what he was about to do was going to cost him something he might not get back, and that he had made the calculation and made it wrong, because the calculation had been about the operation and not about her, and those were not the same variable. "You thought keeping me in the dark was protecting me," she said. "Yes." "And what do you think now?" He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. "I think I decided what protection meant without asking you what protection meant. And I think that's not something I can justify." He looked at her. "I'm not trying to justify it." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the garden was in the particular green of late morning, the oak trees still and ordinary. The house that had been a waiting room was just a house now, with a baby sleeping down the hall, and the difference between those two things was not small. "I was so angry at you," she said. "I was angry in a way I haven't been at anyone. The kind of anger that has weight." She looked at her own cup. "I sat in that chair in the middle of that concrete room, and I was angry at you the whole time, even when the contractions hit, even when I was scared." "I know. I want you to know that the anger didn't go away when you came through the door." She looked at him. "It didn't go away when they let us leave. It didn't go away when Elena was born." A pause. "It's still here. It's smaller, but it's here." "Okay," he said. "I'm telling you that because I'm not going to pretend it isn't." She held his eyes without flinching. "And I'm telling you that it being here doesn't mean I'm not also, still, in this." She picked up the coffee cup. "Both things are true at the same time. I need you to be able to hold both things." He was quiet for a moment. "I can hold both things." "Don't say it like that if you can't." I can, he said. I've been carrying both things about myself for a long time. It's not a condition I'm unfamiliar with. She looked at him. Something in that landed differently than he had perhaps intended, or perhaps exactly as he had intended. She couldn't always tell with him, and that was one of the things she was going to have to decide she could live with. The not always knowing. The opacity that was not malice but was architecture, built over years, that would not come down in a morning conversation or a month of morning conversations. I want honesty, she said. Not the version that protects me from information, actual honesty, even when it's inconvenient. Yes. And I want, when you make decisions that involve me, I want to be in the room. Yes. Say it like you've thought about it. He put the cup down. He looked at her with the expression she had seen only a handful of times in 4 years. Not the operational expression, not the controlled surface, but the one underneath it, the one that didn't have a professional function. That was simply him. I've thought about nothing else for 8 weeks. Every version of what I'd say when we got here. Every way I'd failed the specific person who least deserved it. He paused. You were making lists in a notebook to survive my choices. That's what I'm sitting with. The kitchen was very still. I know, she said. She did not tell him it was fine, because it was not fine. It was what it was, which was survivable and real, and the foundation of something that was going to have to be built differently than the 4 years that came before it. She did not perform forgiveness because forgiveness was not a performance, it was a direction, and she was facing that direction and walking. And the walking was what mattered, not the arrival. She reached across the table and picked up his hand and turned it over, palm up, and looked at it for a moment, and then she set it back down and stood up to refill the coffee. That was enough. That was the whole of it. Milk. In the months that followed, Damien Vescari dissolved the illegal infrastructure of everything he had spent 11 years building, piece by piece, in coordination with Reyes's office, and 2 additional federal jurisdictions that had an interest in the Harlan Network's subordinate operations. He did this without negotiating advantage for himself beyond the cooperation agreement already in place, which surprised Reyes and did not surprise Vivian. He registered a legitimate investment company. He hired people he could pay in daylight. He sat across desks from lawyers and accountants who asked him questions. He answered directly and filed paperwork he signed with his own name without routing it through 3 intermediary structures. It was slower than everything he had done before. It was less powerful in the immediate sense. He found, after several months, that he did not miss the power the way he had expected to. What he had expected to feel was loss. What he felt instead was something closer to legibility, the specific relief of being a thing that could be read correctly. Vivian became his partner in the business, formally, with her name on the documentation and her own decisions and her own clients. She was better at certain parts of it than he was. He told her this. She told him she knew, which was the response he deserved, and the one that made him laugh, which was not a thing that happened very often, and was, when it did, disproportionately good. Elena grew. She grew in the way that children grow when the house they are growing in is not waiting for something, actively, steadily, with the particular confidence of a person who has never had reason to doubt the ground beneath them. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stillness, and a laugh that belonged entirely to herself. The estate outside the city they kept. Vivian had the garden replanted, not the manicured, designed garden of a house that was meant to photograph well, but something less ordered, something that grew in directions that were its own. She worked in it on Saturday mornings when Elena was old enough to sit in the grass and watch her mother's hands in the dirt with the absorbed attention of someone learning what work looks like. Damien watched them from the kitchen window sometimes. He made the coffee, and he stood at the window, and he watched his wife and his daughter in the imperfect garden, and he thought about the specific cost of the years that had led here. Not with guilt, because guilt was not useful, and he had spent enough of his life in currency that wasn't useful, but with the clear-eyed accounting of a man who understood that nothing in this view had been free, and nothing in it had been inevitable, and that the distance between what it could have been and what it was had been crossed by a woman in a concrete room who had held herself together with her own hands and sent him a single word at exactly the right moment. One Saturday, Vivian came in from the garden and stood at the sink washing her hands, and Elena was on her hip, and she looked at him standing at the window with the coffee, and she said, What are you thinking about? Nothing, he said. Then, everything. She looked at him for a moment. Elena reached for the coffee cup and Vivian redirected the small hand with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for months. Both things, she said. Both things, he agreed. She set Elena down on the kitchen floor, and Elena crawled toward the cabinet that had the wooden spoons in it, which was her current primary interest in life. And Vivian dried her hands and came and stood next to Damien at the window and looked at the garden. And they stood there together in the ordinary morning light, and the house around them was not a waiting room and was not a fortress, and was not a mechanism for any purpose beyond the one it had finally become, which was simply the place where these people lived, which was, in the end, the only thing it had ever needed to be.